Welcome to our second ever Mission Family Podcast. My name is Brandon Sari, and I'm the Generational Ministries Pastor here at Life Mission Church. And we believe that healthy families never happen by accident, they happen on purpose. And we want to help equip parents to pass on a vibrant faith to the next generation. And after the podcast, I want to encourage you to go to our online Facebook group for some additional resources so you can use them and engage together as a family. Over the past couple months, we've been talking about family values. And before we go into this week's podcast, I want to encourage you, if you haven't listened to our last podcast, to go back and read it and then come back to this one. So let's review a little bit. The health of our family is a combination of what we create and allow. What we create is the values that we instill. It's also the traditions that we do as a family, the things that you might do every week or the things you might do every year. It's the things that you accept and the things that you encourage. It's the things that you create together as a family. But the second contributing factor to the health of our families is what we allow. Are we allowing the right things? Are you calling something a phase that really needs to be corrected? Or are you tolerating a behavior that you don't want to have replicated within your other kids? What are the things that you're creating and allowing? And are they the right things to create the healthy family that you want to create? And the number one thing that shapes the health of our families is our values. And in the last month's podcast, we talked about how do we define them. We created 5 to 7 phrases that were sticky. And then we took those sticky phrases that were easy to interact with and we posted them somewhere within our house. And we put them in a place that was easy to see and easy for us to engage with. And in this episode, I want to take it 2 more steps further. I want to talk about how do we instill these values deep into our families, and then how do we evaluate and adjust if they're not the right values, because we might not have gotten it right the first time. So right now, you probably have those 5 to 7 values. You've posted them in a creative way. Now let's talk about step 3, instill them. How do we take these values and get them deep within the roots of our family where we don't just think about them, we just naturally do these values because it's who we are. That's what these values are intended to create. And to do that, the first step is this. We want you to create a weekly plan. Find a rhythm that works for you. You might have one night a week, or you might do a night and then a Saturday. Find 2 times that normally work for your family and find the time that works best. And then what we want you to do is we want you to share that value in a creative way. For us, it's stories at bedtime. I've got a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they love bedtime stories. So I'll take the value of the month, and I'll find a story, whether it be from the Bible or from history, or sometimes I'll even just make up some crazy story about that value. And I try to incorporate the value in a way that's fun and creative for them. And then we start to talk about it. Another thing that we do is No Tech Taco Tuesday, where we get rid of all the phones, we get rid of all the screens, and we just engage together as a family. And we might play games there, but during this family-based activity, we want to talk about the values, and we want to instill these values deep within the culture of our family. And that's what works for my family. What's going to work for your family? What are you going to do in your home to help get these values deep within the culture of your family? And I just want to encourage you. You're probably not going to get it right the first time. You're probably going to try something like, that didn't work. Well, find a time that is going to work and make that time a priority. Make sure your family knows why it's a priority. Why are you doing this? Why are you turning off a TV and telling stories and talking about family values? They need to know the why. So create that plan. Second thing is this. Focus on one value at a time. Because if you're trying to get all the values in 1 week, it's just not going to work. They're not going to get it. And it's not going to be very deeply rooted. So I want you to not just think about 1 week at a time. I want you to think about months and even years at a time. You might have a value that you want to instill that isn't there yet. So it means it's going to take more conversation. It's going to take more engagement than what's normal. So you need to maybe set aside 2 months to talk about one value. But focus on one at a time. And think long term, not just this week, think in months and years, because it's going to take years to develop this within your family. And they're not going to reflect it from day one, which is why we got to keep talking about it. The second thing after creating that plan is we're going to celebrate it. The best way to get this value deep within your kids is to catch them doing it right and celebrate it publicly. For example, my son Levi, we have a family value that we follow Jesus. And Levi had a bunch of birthday money left over. And he decided that he was going to use some of his birthday money and some of his commission money, and he was going to buy his own value. And I was just thrilled. It was his idea. The Bible that he had was like a comic strip based Bible, and he'd read it twice, and he wanted a new Bible, a Bible like mom and dad's. And I loved the fact that he wants to engage in his Bible. So when he did that, man, I told everybody, and I made sure when I told people about it and how proud I was, other people were around. And you should have seen him light up. Why? I celebrated him publicly. I caught him in the act of doing a family value right, because celebrating it is way more effective than correcting it. Because sometimes they're going to get it wrong, but when they catch it right, that is the moment. Make a huge deal about it. Make a party about it. You can't over-celebrate your kids and your family getting it right. The third part about this is to correct them. We do want to celebrate, but there is a time for correction. And correction is different than celebration. Celebration's done publicly. We do it and we make a big deal out of it. Other people need to know. But correction is the exact opposite. Correction needs to be done privately and kindly. We never want to shame or embarrass, because that's not the way that God acts. That's not the way that Jesus interacted with other people. He never shamed people or embarrassed people. When you see him bringing correction, it was most of the time very, very private, and it was always incredibly kind. And I think the best way for us to correct a value that's not being represented is to do it in a private and kind way. And in correction, make sure you explain the why. Don't just tell them that they got it wrong. Explain why the value is a big deal. For example, we believe in our family that following Jesus is a core value. And it's important that if they get it wrong, that we explain why. That it's not just following Jesus because it's what we do, but we actually believe that the best life lived is the one that follows Jesus. And we want our kids to understand that. And when you begin with why and not just what, begin with why. Communicate it. Over-communicate it. Make sure that they understand why this is important to your family and your family values. So far we've created a weekly plan. We have celebrated them. We've caught them in the act. And then we've corrected them. The last one is capture sacred moments. It's like a celebration. It's like a correction, but it's a bigger deal than that. It is looking deeper than just the behavior. For example, one of our sacred moments is Eden, our 7-year-old. Her brother Levi told an embarrassing story about her, and it really wounded her. And me and Jonna, my wife, we weren't there to witness this event that took place. But later, when Eden was around us, she decided to tell an embarrassing story about her brother. And I had heard already about the fact that Levi had shared the story about his sister and how it wasn't very kind. And I corrected him privately. But in this moment, there was something much deeper than Eden just sharing an embarrassing story about her brother. It was about her need for justice. She wanted to feel justified. She wanted her brother to receive the feeling that he had given her. And we got to sit her down and we got to talk about how honor always, which is one of our core values, she didn't do it right there. And part of honor is believing that you don't need to defend yourself and that justice isn't when you get even. And we took this moment, I brought her up on my lap and I shared the why with her and I corrected her. She wasn't grounded. She didn't get a spank. And I just brought her on my lap because it was so much deeper than that, because she was so wounded by the story that her brother had told. And this was a sacred moment because I believe in this moment, sitting on my lap, I was able to connect with Eden and tell her, wow, Eden, you're incredibly valuable. And you know what? Sometimes as people, we don't get it right. And sometimes we do things that are embarrassing. And sometimes people tell those stories. But I want to encourage you. You're incredibly loved. You're so valuable. And you know what? As Sarahs, we honor people. And I want to encourage you to show honor to your brother, even when you don't feel like he honors you. And since then, there's just been a change in my daughter's heart. And you're going to have moments like that. Sacred moments. And I want to encourage you to capture those moments. So how are we going to instill this value into our kids? First, we're going to communicate with them by creating a clear plan. And they're going to know what that plan is. Then we're going to celebrate them. We're going to catch them doing it right. And at times, we're going to correct it. When they get it wrong, we're going to explain why they got it wrong, why it's important, and what behaviors need to change for them to reflect that value. And last, we're going to capture those sacred moments. So far we've talked about how do we define our values, how do we communicate our values, how do we instill them. Here's the last one, evaluate. How do we evaluate and adjust? Because sometimes a word might feel a little bit small. You might have written this value and it's sticky, but it just doesn't feel big enough. Like you might have chosen the word happiness and you're like, it's more than happiness. It's actually really about joy. Joy is a better word, and you might need to adjust a phrase. And sometimes a value just doesn't fit your family. Like you might have chosen the word tradition, but your family really is more spontaneous than traditional, and tradition just doesn't fit, and that's okay. You just need to get a different value. You might go back and rework that first worksheet a little bit to find that value that works better for you. Or one might not be clear. Like you might have the value of love God, which is really, really good. But for you, you might want to say follow Jesus. Why? Because in our culture, people are saying that everyone's God or something else is God. And we believe as a family that there's only one God. And we believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So we don't want our kids to misinterpret follow God. We actually want them to follow Jesus. So sometimes you need to make a value just a little bit more clear. So I want you to evaluate. And even when you get it wrong, that's okay. Just make an adjustment and move forward. So let's review a little bit. Healthy families never happen by accident. They happen on purpose. And the health of your family is a combination of what you create and what you allow. But the number one thing that shapes the health of your families is your values. And how are we going to instill those values? Well, first we're going to define them. We're going to communicate them. We're going to instill them deep within the culture of our family and within our kids. Also, we're going to evaluate and adjust. So now I want to give you a couple next steps. Number one thing is I want you to work through the worksheet that we provided. And then I want you to begin by instilling just one value at a time. And then I want you to evaluate and adjust. And this is going to take a long time. You're not going to be able to do it all this week or even this month. You might evaluate in 6 months, and that's okay. I just want to encourage you to evaluate and adjust. And next, I want you to go to our Facebook group, and I want you to share about how are you creatively instilling these values. Maybe you need to share a story about celebration. Don't share the correction story, because remember, that's private and kind. And what are the creative ideas that you're doing within your family, within the regular week rhythm that's working for you to connect and instill these values deep within your family? Or maybe you need to share one of those sacred moments, and that's just going to encourage somebody else to find theirs. Also, here's a new one for this podcast. We want you to send in some questions. We want you to share some ideas of some things that you'd like us to talk about here on this podcast, or maybe just some basic questions that you have within family values. And we're going to do our best to work in some of those questions in the months to come within this podcast itself. Why? Healthy families happen not by accident. They happen on purpose.